ChessFest Academy here on Lesson 8. We're doing Part 2 on the pawns. In Lesson 7 we just covered how they move and attack, how they capture. Now we have to go through some of the tricky things with pawns. Let me just tell you some of them, show you some of them. Let's just take 2 pawns for each. Let's just put out your D and E pawns for white, which will go on the 2nd rank there, and your D and E pawns for black, which will go on the 7th rank. So the D and E file pawns, white's go on the 2nd rank, black's on the 7th. Let's start off as we have before, but a little different. White go on and move E4. Black answer this time with D5. D5. Now black has set up a capture here, right? He's offering his pawn free and clear. White, let's say you're feeling hungry and you want to gobble up this pawn. So go ahead, white, EX D5. So your E pawn will capture on D5, EX D5. Now here's one of the trickiest things in chess. I'm going to tell you, it does not come up much. It's relatively rare. Maybe 1 in 100 games you'll see this happen. But you need to know about it for 2 reasons. You might be able to do it someday, and it might really benefit you. Or someone might make this move on you, and you need to understand what they're doing. Let's say black is next move is going to take his E pawn and move it out to E5. So black E5. Now, move that black pawn back for a second, and let's think. Moving back to E7 where he started. Look at the white pawn. Where can he move to if he wanted to move next? He only has one choice, right? He can only move forward. There's nothing there where he's attacking. So he could only move to D6. Now what squares is that white's D pawn? What squares, or his D5 pawn I should say, what squares is white's D5 pawn attacking? He's attacking C6 and E6, right? Diagonally this way with the shield in front, diagonally the other direction with the shield in front. So you notice when black moves his pawn out 2 spaces, he actually passes through a square which the white pawn is attacking, E6. So black, go ahead and take, let's do that move again, take your E pawn and slide him out to E5. Slide him slowly, and you can see he passes right through the attacked square, E6. Now this is tricky, and to make it even trickier, they gave it a French name. It's called en passant. White, on your next move, and on your next move only, you have the choice, you don't have to, but you can actually capture that black pawn because he passed through a square you are attacking. You can capture him en passant, which means in passing, en passant. So an en passant capture is a rare thing when a pawn moves through a square that another pawn is attacking. And oddly, this only applies to pawns. If a pawn moves out 2 squares passing through a square that a bishop or a knight or a rook or a queen or a king is attacking, the rule does not apply. It's only with 2 of these foot soldiers, these pawns. So again, black has moved out E5, passing through the attacked E6 square. Now here, it gets even weirder. I warned you, pawns are tricky. It gets even weirder. White, if you're going to capture black, that black pawn, guess where you capture him? You don't capture him where he is, because pawns don't attack to the side, right? And where did you really tag him with your sword? Where did you get him with that sword? It was back on E6, wasn't it? So if white wants to effect this en passant capture, he has to do it on his next move. You can't wait and 10 moves later say, oh yeah, I did an en passant before. It has to be your next move. White will go ahead and capture the black pawn, not where he is, but where you tagged him with your sword, back on E6. And so that's where white's pawn goes, is to E6, and the black pawn comes off the board. The way you'd write that is DX E6, because that's where the capture is actually happening, and after you'd write EP for en passant, because otherwise it might not make sense when you're playing back a game. So So that is one of the crazy pawn things. And again, it's pretty rare. If you find it happening in every game you play, something's probably wrong. Now there's one other thing that pawns can do. Let's just leave black off the board here and look at white. If this white pawn on the E file on his next move, after black move, were to travel up to E7, and then on his next move were to travel all the way to E8, this pawn has successfully crossed the board. Now this is a rule that developed much later in chess. He's all the way across the board. He can't move, right? And he can't capture. He's just done. But that seems kind of weird, doesn't it? That a pawn would travel all the way across the board and he's just done. So something magical happens when this pawn gets all the way across the board. Think of it this way. If a foot soldier, an ordinary soldier in battle, got all the way across the battlefield and did something incredibly heroic, wouldn't he be promoted? Wouldn't he get a medal and say, we're going to take you up the ranks? That's exactly what happens to this pawn. This pawn can be promoted. Now, when that pawn crosses the board and you get to promote him, you really could promote him to, well, almost any piece. You can't keep him a pawn. That doesn't make sense. You could make him a bishop. You could make him a knight. You could make him a rook. But except for in very rare cases, you are generally going to go for the queen. Now, there is a common misunderstanding. So that pawn becomes a queen. So that E pawn is off the board. You take him off and replace him with the queen as soon as he gets across. So as soon as white does E8, you replace it with the queen. Not on your next move or anything, but right then and there. He does E8, it's promoted to a queen. Now there's a common misconception that you can only promote the pawn to a piece that's already been captured. In other words, you get back one of your pieces, sort of like in dodgeball when somebody's out and they come back in. That is a common misconception, but it is not chess rules. You can promote that pawn to any of those pieces, bishop, knight, rook, or queen. Obviously, we can't have two kings on the board. That never happens, and you wouldn't keep it a pawn. It must be promoted. And 99.99999% of the time, you are going to take a queen. And if that means you have two queens on the board, then so be it. That is fine. There's long been confusion, and that's because the rule actually changed at one point in history. But so that pawn is now promoted, and he is a queen. Now, just like en passant captures, this should be relatively rare. If you find yourself promoting a pawn in every game, or even worse, say promoting 4 pawns and ending up with 5 queens on the board, something is drastically wrong. That should not be happening. A pawn promotion should be a very rare thing, and a beautiful thing as well, because now that piece that was only worth 1 point is promoted to a queen worth 9 points, and that can, right there, that can be the end of the game. It can turn things so dramatically. So a couple of funky pawn rules, the en passant capture, along with pawn promotion. And we will see you next time on Lesson 9, where we start getting into some of the other tricky things. Stay with it, keep practicing. See you back here on ChessFest Academy.